When the act of intimacy concludes, what many fail to realize is that the most powerful moment is just beginning. Most men operate from a belief that sex is the pinnacle, the grand finale. But in truth, that belief limits them from accessing the deeper realm of emotional bonding, spiritual alignment, and psychological resonance that becomes available only after the act is complete. The physical connection might satisfy a surface-level hunger, but the emotional response that follows defines the quality and potential of the relationship. After sex, the body is still. The energy between two people, however, is still vibrating, and it is in this subtle, sacred silence that the real communication takes place. What you say without words in those moments will speak louder than anything you whispered during the build-up. It is in the way you hold her, in the way you breathe beside her, in the way you remain present, or disappear. That's where everything shifts. Most guys don't even realize that the next few minutes, the next hour, is where true emotional value is built. You may have satisfied her body, but what will linger in her memory is how you made her feel after. That's the truth few are willing to face. Intimacy doesn't end with climax. It's just where a new kind of vulnerability begins. She may lie next to you with her guard down, her heart open, her soul exposed. And if you roll away, pick up your phone, or turn on the TV, you've just told her she was a moment, not a meaning. Most men are conditioned to disconnect immediately, subconsciously defending themselves from feeling too much. But what if that's exactly where the magic happens? What if instead of retreating, you leaned into that moment? Instead of closing off, you softened? Instead of acting tough, you chose presence? A woman remembers how you made her feel, especially when she's most vulnerable. After sex, her intuition sharpens. She's attuned to your energy. If you're absent emotionally, even while lying beside her, she'll feel abandoned. If you're silent, not in peace, but in disconnection, she'll feel rejected. And if you pretend that nothing deeper just happened, she'll start to believe you never cared to begin with. The opportunity to create something meaningful doesn't come during the act itself. It comes after. That's when trust is either built or broken. That's when a woman decides whether you're just another guy or someone worth opening her soul to. This isn't about being overly romantic. It's about being real, being human, being aware that your energy lingers, your presence matters, and your response to her vulnerability becomes your legacy in her mind. Too many men operate on autopilot. They chase pleasure, achieve it, and then abandon the space where intimacy could flourish. But real strength isn't in the performance, it's in the presence. What you do after sex shows who you really are. Not the mask you wore to attract her, not the game you played to seduce her, but the man who either honors her essence or uses her body. Every time you choose to remain present after intimacy, you rewrite your emotional DNA. You become someone who chooses connection over ego, presence over pride. And when you hold her, not because you're supposed to, but because you want to, because your soul recognizes her humanity, you offer her something most men never do: safety. Emotional safety. That's rarer than any physical skill. That's the currency of trust. That's what she'll replay in her mind when she thinks about you. The man who stayed, the man who saw her, the man who didn't disappear into distraction the moment he got what he wanted. And if you can't offer that, ask yourself why. What belief systems taught you that emotions were weak? That vulnerability was dangerous, that staying was optional. These are the narratives you must confront. Because when you step into that post-intimacy space with clarity and intention, you don't just offer her something sacred. You heal a part of yourself too. You rewrite the script that told you love had to be guarded, that feelings had to be avoided, that connection had to be controlled. Most guys never think twice about their energy after sex. They assume the job is done, but those who are truly awake, truly tuned in, understand that the real work, the beautiful work, begins after. In that quiet space, you have the power to uplift or diminish, to empower or confuse, to anchor or unnerve. And what you choose in that moment says everything about the man you are becoming. Most men enter into intimacy with a mindset wired for self-gratification. It's how the world has conditioned them: get what you want, take what you can, perform, impress, conquer, move on. But when you continue to see sex as a transaction rather than a transmission, you rob yourself, and her, of something far more profound. Conscious connection doesn't begin in the bedroom, it begins in your mind. And until you shift from thinking about what you got to what you gave, you'll always come up empty in the aftermath, no matter how good it felt in the moment. True connection is about energy exchange. When you're only focused on your climax, your pleasure, your validation, you've reduced the entire experience to a selfish pursuit. But when you open your awareness to the impact of your presence, your words, your energy, you elevate the experience to a sacred one. The act of sex becomes an emotional ceremony, an unspoken agreement to enter a vulnerable space where healing, intimacy, and spiritual clarity can arise. That doesn't happen when your mindset is still stuck in taking. It happens when you evolve into someone who gives, not out of obligation, but out of intention. What separates a man from a boy is how he responds after the act. The immature ego says, "I got what I wanted." The awakened man asks, "Did I offer what she needed?" There's no power in simply satisfying yourself. Power comes from knowing that your presence created a space where another human being felt seen, safe, and honored. Conscious connection demands awareness. It demands you remain emotionally available after the physical peak. It demands that you don't check out just because your body is satisfied. That's what most guys don't understand. The real depth begins when the tension ends. When you focus only on what you got from the experience, you feed your lower self. You strengthen your attachment to ego, control, and validation. But when you reflect on what you gave emotionally, spiritually, mentally, you activate your higher self. You begin to rewrite the old programming that told you sex is just about performance or release. Instead, it becomes a practice of presence, emotional intelligence, and energetic responsibility. It's not just about how well you moved your body, it's about how consciously you moved your energy. So many men rush through intimacy like it's a race to the finish line. They think that being fast, hard, or dominant defines success. But when you move with awareness, with sensitivity to her rhythm and emotional state, you create a resonance that lingers long after the act is over. She remembers how you touched her soul, not just her skin. She recalls how you looked into her eyes afterward, not how long you lasted. She replays the emotional safety you gave her when the lights were off and the words were few, not the mechanics of what happened. This shift from self-gratification to conscious connection is not just about her. It's about you. It's about stepping into emotional maturity. It's about healing your own inner wounds that taught you to disconnect after pleasure. It's about releasing the fear of closeness that tells you it's safer to distance yourself than to stay and feel. When you remain present, even when your ego wants to run, you teach yourself that intimacy is not a threat. It's a gift, a mirror, a lesson. And if you allow yourself to stay in that moment, fully present, you begin to feel the richness of what it truly means to connect. You stop treating women like stepping stones to self-esteem. You start seeing them as reflections of your own growth. The more intentional you are, the more powerful the exchange becomes. A simple touch becomes a healing tool. A whispered word becomes an anchor. A look in her eyes becomes an entire conversation. But none of that is accessible to the man who only shows up for the climax and checks out after it. Conscious connection requires that you stay when your instincts tell you to escape. It requires that you feel when your programming tells you to numb. It requires that you give even when you think you've given enough. This is where men transform, not in the bedroom but in the stillness after. When you lie next to her, not as someone who achieved, but as someone who contributed. When your mind isn't racing to the next goal, but resting in the moment. When your heart doesn't harden in fear, but opens in gratitude. This is when the real man shows up, not the one who chased pleasure, but the one who understood its power. When you ask yourself, how did I make her feel? What energy did I leave behind? What message did my presence send? You begin to evolve. Because you can't call yourself a man of depth if your only intention was satisfaction. Satisfaction is fleeting. Connection is eternal. And when you learn to offer that, even in the silence after, you become the kind of man she doesn't forget. Not because of how you touched her body, but because of how you held her energy. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is access. It is the hidden key to transformation, and yet it's the one thing most men are afraid to offer, especially after intimacy. Society has conditioned men to stay guarded, to build emotional walls, to avoid anything that might make them appear soft or exposed. But what they fail to see is that their greatest strength lies in their ability to be emotionally honest, raw, and present. Saying yes to vulnerability is the doorway to a completely different experience of love, life, and personal evolution. Most men were taught to say yes to the chase, yes to the conquest, yes to the idea of being in control. But the moment a deeper connection begins to unfold, the moment emotional intimacy starts to grow, they recoil. They shut down, they run. Why? Because vulnerability asks for presence without armor. It asks for truth without ego. It asks for the real version of you, not the performance. And that is terrifying to the man who has spent his life believing that control equals power. In truth, control is a prison, and vulnerability is the key that unlocks the cell. When you say yes to being emotionally open after sex, you disrupt the story that love is dangerous, that closeness leads to loss, that caring too much makes you weak. You give yourself permission to feel not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally. Most guys have trained themselves to experience sex as a temporary high followed by emotional withdrawal. But when you stay emotionally available after the act, when you allow yourself to connect beyond the physical, you initiate healing not just for her, but for yourself. You begin to realize how many layers of pain, guilt, and confusion have been hiding under your masculine identity. It takes courage to say yes to feeling deeply. It takes courage to say yes to staying present in the quiet moments when there are no words, only energy. It takes courage to ask her how she feels and then actually listen, not to fix, not to defend, but to understand. That's the power of emotional leadership, and it's the one thing most women crave but rarely receive. A man who is emotionally intelligent enough to stay with her emotionally, not just physically, changes the way she experiences love. Not just because of what he does, but because of who he chooses to be. Saying yes to vulnerability means opening the door to the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. The parts that are afraid of rejection, the parts that carry old wounds from past relationships, the parts that were taught that emotions make you less of a man. But when you stop avoiding those parts, when you face them and choose to integrate them, you rise into a version of yourself that is more whole, more present, more powerful. Real power is not domination, it's embodiment. It's knowing who you are and choosing to share that with another person without hiding behind performance, pride, or perfection. After intimacy, a woman often feels emotionally open. Her heart is exposed, her soul is awake, and in that moment, she's searching not just for touch, but for truth. She wants to know if she's safe with you, not just physically, but emotionally. If you pull away, become cold, or act distant, it tells her that she can't trust you with her heart. But if you stay, if you look her in the eye, if you speak from your center, not with manipulation, but with authenticity, you offer her something most men never do: emotional safety. And emotional safety creates emotional intimacy. That is the space where real connection lives. That is the space where a relationship moves from surface to substance. But you can't access that space without first saying yes to yourself. Yes to the discomfort of being seen. Yes to the possibility of being misunderstood. Yes to the emotional risk that comes with caring deeply. That one word yes can change your entire destiny. It can shift your trajectory as a man. It can take you from a pattern of disconnected encounters to a path of soulful connection. Saying yes to vulnerability is the antidote to numbness. It brings you back into your body, your heart, your truth. It makes you more magnetic, not less, more powerful, not weaker. Because when you know yourself deeply enough to be vulnerable, you stop needing approval from others. You stop seeking validation through sex. You stop running from intimacy because you've finally realized that love doesn't destroy, it rebuilds. And in that space, you become a man who isn't afraid to feel, who isn't afraid to show up fully, who isn't afraid to be seen without a mask. Most men don't say yes to vulnerability because they're still living in fear. Fear of judgment, fear of emotional chaos, fear of losing control. But those fears are illusions. They fade the moment you choose to face them with presence. Every time you say yes to being real, you reclaim a piece of your power. You restore the part of you that got buried under years of silence, pride, and emotional hiding. And every time you stay present with her after intimacy, not just with your body, but with your soul, you teach her, and yourself, that love doesn't have to be complicated, painful, or performative. It can be honest. It can recognizing the pattern means you stop explaining away disrespect. It can be deeply human. There's a silent storm that brews within most men after intimacy, one they don't talk about, complicated. It comes in the form of guilt, shame, emotional numbness, or confusion. And often, it's not because of what they did during the act, but because of what they haven't healed within themselves. They're caught in emotional patterns they never chose, but they inherited, absorbed, or were conditioned into. Reprogramming these negative emotional patterns is not just a suggestion. It's a necessity if you ever want to experience intimacy with depth, freedom, and true presence. Many men feel an unspoken discomfort after sex. They distance themselves, become quiet, or dive into distractions like checking their phone, lighting a cigarette, or cracking a joke. It's not because they don't care, it's because they don't know how to process what's happening inside them. Intimacy, by its very nature, opens the emotional body. It brings the subconscious to the surface. And if what's lying underneath hasn't been dealt with old wounds, rejection, shame, fear, it rises with full force the moment the physical act is over. And without tools to face it, most men revert to what they know, withdrawal. But withdrawal doesn't solve anything. It reinforces the pattern, it deepens the wound, it teaches the mind that emotions are to be avoided, not explored. That closeness is unsafe, that connection leads to discomfort, and so they become men who fear the very thing they crave. They want to be loved, understood, and accepted, but they don't know how to sit with their own emotions long enough to receive it. And because they haven't reprogrammed the voice inside that says, "You're not enough, you're going to be hurt, or you don't deserve this," they push away what could have been healing. This is where the real work begins, not in performance, not in attraction, but in awareness. You must become conscious of what your body and heart are telling you after sex. What emotions come up? What thoughts rush in? Are you judging yourself? Are you afraid she'll see the real you? Are you carrying unresolved guilt from past relationships, past choices, or past versions of yourself? These questions aren't just reflections, they're roadmaps. They point you to the internal blocks that must be faced if you ever want to experience intimacy as something more than just a physical transaction. Emotional reprogramming begins with honesty, radical, unfiltered honesty with yourself. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel. If you feel ashamed, name it. If you feel distant, explore it. If you feel overwhelmed, sit with it. Too many men try to bypass their emotional reality by numbing out or pretending it doesn't exist. But the truth is, Every act of suppression creates more distance between you and the life you truly desire. A life where love is effortless. A life where connection doesn't feel like a threat. A life where you don't have to run from your own heart. You've likely been taught to tough it out, to man up, to keep emotions locked away like dangerous explosives. But the irony is, the moment you allow yourself to feel is the moment you regain control. Not control in the way society defines it, not domination, but real, grounded emotional command. The power to choose your response instead of reacting from a wound. That's what separates a man who keeps repeating the same patterns from one who evolves. He doesn't just perform better, he lives deeper. He doesn't just touch her body, he reaches her soul. And to do that, you must rewire the stories in your head. The story that says your worth is tied to performance. The story that says opening up will get you hurt. The story that says women only care about strength and not sincerity. These stories were given to you, not chosen by you, and now it's your responsibility to question them, to break them down, to replace them with beliefs that align with who you want to become. Because until you do, you'll always find yourself repeating the same emotional loop: connection, discomfort, withdrawal, guilt. But imagine if, instead of running, you stayed, not just physically, but emotionally. Imagine if you looked inward and welcomed whatever feelings arose without judgment. If you turned to her after sex and allowed yourself to be human, not perfect, not scripted, not emotionless, just real, vulnerable, present, that is the moment healing begins. That is the moment you teach your nervous system that connection is not a danger zone, but a sanctuary. That is the moment you become emotionally free. When you take ownership of your emotional patterns, you stop blaming women for your distance. You stop sabotaging intimacy. You stop looking for reasons to pull away and start looking for reasons to stay. To grow, to love more deeply, and she will feel that shift. She may not know how to put it into words, but she will feel safer, more seen, more connected, because you've done something most men haven't. You've gone inward. You've faced your shadows. You've reprogrammed your emotional code to make space for love, not fear. And that, right there, is the beginning of transformation. Not just in your relationships, but in how you relate to yourself. When you make peace with your emotions, when you learn to hold space for them instead of fleeing from them, you become a man who doesn't just seek intimacy, you embody it. You live it, you lead with it, and your relationships reflect that. They stop being cycles of confusion and start becoming sources of growth. Because you've done the inner work that most never even begin. After intimacy, there is a sacred moment that few recognize and even fewer honor. It's a space where the physical fades into the emotional, and the energy between two people becomes thick with meaning. Most men, however, let this moment pass unnoticed. They return to old habits, scrolling their phones, turning on the TV, getting dressed quickly, or even leaving altogether. In doing so, they unknowingly reinforce emotional distance, mistrust, and shallow connection. What they miss is the opportunity to create something powerful. A ritual that strengthens the emotional bond, deepens the spiritual connection, and rewrites their entire relationship with intimacy. Rituals of power are not grand gestures. They're small, intentional acts done with presence and meaning. Most guys assume they need to be overly romantic or dramatic to make a lasting impact. But the truth is, the simple decision to remain, to be still, to be emotionally available after sex carries more weight than flowers, expensive dinners, or elaborate texts. When you stay with her, truly stay with her, you send a message that says, "This wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about the act. This was about us, about something deeper." Women feel energy in ways men often don't understand. After sex, their senses are heightened. They can feel whether you're emotionally present or mentally checked out. They can sense whether your touch is sincere or routine. They can read your silence and know whether it's a silence of peace or a silence of disconnection. When you create a post-intimacy ritual, whether that's holding her without words, sharing thoughts about the moment, expressing gratitude, or even simply laying together in peaceful presence, you allow her nervous system to relax, her heart to open, and her trust in you to grow. Rituals create rhythm. They bring consistency to emotional connection. And when you make these rituals a regular part of your intimate experiences, you change the way she experiences not only you, but herself. She begins to feel valued, not used. She begins to feel chosen, not chased. She begins to feel emotionally safe in your presence, and that emotional safety becomes the foundation of everything else: communication, loyalty, attraction, and respect. But without those rituals, she's left to guess what you're thinking. She's left to question your intentions. She's left to doubt what just happened, no matter how physically satisfying the experience was. You have to understand, it's not about saying the perfect thing. It's not about performing emotional gestures you don't mean. It's about being real, present, and tuned in. It's about looking her in the eyes and allowing yourself to be seen, even if you feel vulnerable doing so. It's about asking her how she feels, not because you're trying to impress her, but because you genuinely care. It's about touching her gently, not with the hunger of desire, but with the tenderness of appreciation. These moments become anchors in her memory, and more importantly, they shift your own inner emotional blueprint. Most men were never taught how to be emotionally consistent. They were taught to pursue, conquer, and move on. They were taught that staying too long, caring too much, or being too emotionally available made them weak. But emotional consistency is not weakness, it's maturity. It's the mark of a man who has nothing to prove and everything to offer. When you turn post-sex moments into sacred rituals, you prove that your strength lies in your ability to hold space, not in your ability to escape it. You stop being the man who performs and start being the man who connects, and it doesn't take much. You can create your own rituals unique to your dynamic with her. Maybe it's placing your hand over her heart and breathing in sync. Maybe it's offering her a glass of water and looking her in the eye with presence. Maybe it's speaking one sentence about what the moment meant to you. Maybe it's just holding her without needing to fix, explain, or entertain. These simple actions carry profound energy. They are the invisible threads that weave trust, love, and emotional depth between you. When you replace disconnection with ritual, you begin to rewrite not only her experience, but your own. You begin to see intimacy as a shared experience rather than a solo victory. You start to value the emotional residue of the act more than the act itself. You begin to show up differently, not just in the bedroom, but in your life. Because the man who can be present after sex is often the man who can be present in moments of conflict, confusion, and change. The man who can stay when it would be easier to leave. The man who leads not with charm, but with character. Creating these rituals requires intention. You have to be willing to go beyond what's expected and step into what's meaningful. That might be uncomfortable at first. You might feel awkward, unsure, even exposed. But every time you show up with presence, every time you choose connection over avoidance, you gain power, real power. The kind of power that can't be faked, forced, or manipulated. The kind of power that resonates in the energy you carry, the trust you build, and the love you allow to grow between you. That's what makes you unforgettable, not how you touched her, but how you stayed with her after. That's what makes the difference between a man who leaves a moment behind and one who leaves a legacy within it.